Welcome to the show. We're incredibly glad you decided to join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, if you're looking for a shortcut to being well-informed about some of history's most, fascinating and complex moments, you are absolutely in the right place.
You really are.
Today, our deep dive is taking us into a really extraordinary primary source. We're unpacking excerpts from the autobiography of Reverend Sun Myung Moon.
Right.
Specifically, we're looking at a section titled America's Reawakening, the Miracle at the Washington Monument.
Quite a title.
It is. And our mission today is to explore this firsthand account of what was a massive, culturally disruptive movement in 1970s America.
Yeah, we are going to examine the author's claims about the historical context of the era, the sheer ambition behind his actions, and really the staggering scale of what was unfolding in the nation's capital.
But before we jump into the events themselves, we really need to establish some ground rules for our discussion today.
Yes, that is crucial, because this source material contains some highly charged political and social themes.
Definitely.
Throughout this deep dive, we will be discussing the author's specific views on the threat of communism, his highly controversial stance on the Nixon-Watergate scandal, and his observations regarding deep-rooted race relations in America.
Right, it touches on a lot of sensitive areas.
It does, and I want to explicitly tell you, the listener, that we are not taking sides here.
Yep.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, nor are we validating his theological or political claims. Our role today is strictly and impartially reporting on the ideas and the events exactly as they are presented in this original source material.
Exactly. We're just looking at what's on the page.
We are examining this as a historical document, just to understand how this movement viewed itself and its intended impact on a deeply divided world.
That is such an important distinction to keep in mind. It's really about stepping into the shoes of the author for a moment to see the 1970s through a very specific, very ambitious lens.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. The narrative actually sets the stage a bit earlier than you might expect, taking us to the year 1975.
Yeah, up to Berrytown, New York.
Exactly, to the founding of the Unification Theological Seminary. And what jumps out immediately in the text is this incredibly deliberate clash of ideas.
Oh, totally deliberate.
Moon didn't just surround himself with people who already agreed with his theology. He hired a faculty on a strictly interreligious basis.
Which was huge for the time.
We were talking about bringing together professors representing Judaism, Protestantism, Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and what the terminology of the 1970s referred to as Oriental philosophy, all under one roof.
It was essentially designed to be a theological pressure cooker.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
When these professors lectured about their own respective religions, the students were actually encouraged to hit them with incredibly difficult, challenging questions.
They weren't holding back.
Not at all. These classes weren't designed to be passive, quiet lectures where students just took notes. They functioned as forums for intense, unyielding debate.
Wait, let's pause there. Because putting all those fundamentally different worldviews in a single room and actively encouraging them to clash,
Right.
that sounds like a recipe for absolute chaos.
It really does.
You would expect ideological gridlock at best, or just a total breakdown of the institution at worst. But from his perspective, it had the exact opposite effect.
What's fascinating here is how the outcome of these debates is framed in the text. According to Moon, when all these diverse religious traditions were forced to confront one another directly, the participants actually began to break through the incorrect, preconceived concepts they held about each other.
Ah, so it was constructive.
Exactly. The friction didn't cause a destructive fire. It functioned more like a tumbler polishing rough stones. The ultimate goal was mutual understanding.
Right.
And this academic experiment perfectly mirrored his much broader, overarching goal of global religious unification.
And it was apparently highly effective, too. He notes that gifted young people would finish their master's degrees at the seminary and then go straight into doctoral programs at leading institutions like Harvard and Yale.
Yeah, the explicit intention was to position these students to eventually lead the religious world on a global scale.
Which really highlights the sheer scale of the ambition we're talking about here.
It wasn't just about building a successful school in upstate New York. It was about fundamentally reshaping global thought leadership.
And that massive ambition definitely wasn't confined to academia. This brings us to a major milestone on Capitol Hill.
Right.
In 1974 and 1975, Moon was actually invited to speak to the U.S. House of Representatives.
Which is wild.
Being invited to address Congress is a huge deal for anyone, but he was the first foreign religious leader ever invited to do so.
To understand the impact of that, we really have to look at the core message he delivered to these lawmakers, which he titled One Nation Under God.
And he didn't hold back.
No, he didn't soften his rhetoric for a political audience at all. He addressed these seasoned politicians with the exact same directness and urgency that he used when speaking to young people on the street.
He really didn't pull any punches. He stood in front of Congress and told them that America was indeed born through God's blessing, but, and this is a massive pivot, this blessing was not intended solely for the benefit of Americans.
Right, it was meant to save the entire world.
He essentially argues that America must completely sacrifice itself. He told them the country needed a massive reawakening to return to its founding spirit.
And that Christianity, which he saw as fractured into dozens of ineffective denominations, had to be united in order to absorb all other world religions.
It is a striking rhetorical stance, especially when you consider the venue.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he is standing in the absolute center of American political power, looking lawmakers in the eye and telling the nation that its ultimate purpose requires total self-sacrifice.
And after his second invitation to speak, this incredibly bold, provocative message suddenly made a lot of people in the establishment very interested in finding out exactly who this reverend from Korea really was.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the following year, 1976.
A bicentennial year.
Exactly. This is where the narrative uses some incredibly vivid imagery to describe the cultural atmosphere. Let's look at the context here. America is turning 200 years old. You would expect a triumphant, celebratory mood.
You would.
But he paints a picture of an America that was far from peaceful. He observes a country suffering from a deep post-Vietnam, post-Watergate malaise.
Yeah, it was a dark time culturally.
He describes feeling the looming threat of global communism and seeing a generation of young people living lives entirely disconnected from any spiritual foundation, caught up in drugs and what he termed free sex.
He literally assessed the country as being seriously ill.
Right. And he uses a rather startling analogy here. He says he went into the bicentennial celebrations feeling like a surgeon cutting open the heart of a New York that lay sick.
That surgeon analogy is incredibly telling regarding his methodology.
How so?
Well, a surgeon doesn't coddle a patient. A surgeon doesn't just offer comforting words. A surgeon cuts to cure.
Right.
It implies a painful, highly invasive intervention that is absolutely necessary for the patient's survival. He viewed his role not as a passive observer or a gentle spiritual guide, but as someone who was forced to perform a drastic, life-saving operation on the cultural and spiritual heart of the United States.
And that operation started at Yankee Stadium on June 1st, 1976.
Yes.
I really want you to picture this scene, because it is described with an almost cinematic level of detail in the book. It's the day of this massive bicentennial celebration rally, and torrential rains are just pouring down.
Not just a light drizzle.
No, it is a severe storm. A strong wind is whipping all the stadium decorations around the field, tearing things down. But the narrative emphasizes a very specific detail. No one in the massive crowd tried to escape the rain.
They didn't run for the concourses.
They just stayed there.
Instead, the brass band strikes up the song, "You Are My Sunshine."
Yes. You have this massive crowd absolutely soaking wet in the stands of Yankee Stadium, singing about sunshine in the middle of a storm.
And they're singing, but their eyes are crying.
It's described as this profound, almost overwhelming moment where the rain and their tears are just mixing together. And then, right at the climax of this emotional outpouring, the exact moment he walks up to the stage to begin speaking, the sunshine breaks through the heavy rain clouds.
He explicitly writes, "It was as if God had heard their singing."
It's a powerful image.
It is, and we really need to pause and analyze how that moment functions within this historical narrative. When you have these highly visceral, deeply emotional moments where nature itself seemingly aligns with human emotion, the psychological impact is immense.
Unforgettable for the people there.
Exactly. In the context of this autobiography, this weather phenomenon is explicitly framed as divine validation. Think about the people sitting in that stadium. They are getting drenched, they are emotionally exhausted, they're crying, and then they suddenly feel the warmth of the sun on their faces exactly as their leader steps to the microphone.
Wow.
That is the kind of experience that cements a follower's dedication forever. It transforms a standard political or religious rally into a shared spiritual revelation.
But for Moon, Yankee Stadium wasn't the ultimate goal.
No, it wasn't.
It was just the warm-up. He transitions from the surgeon analogy to a boxing analogy.
Hmm.
He mentions his background doing some boxing in school, and he explained that a good boxer can take a lot of jabs and not be truly affected.
Right, you can keep hitting a heavyweight with jabs and they'll just keep moving forward.
Exactly. But if you can land one perfectly timed, solid uppercut, even the strongest boxer in the world is going to be shaken to their core.
And he decided he needed to deliver a massive uppercut to America.
He wanted a rally so undeniably large that his name and his message would be indelibly carved into the nation's consciousness.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to understand just how audacious his next move was. He needed a venue worthy of this uppercut, and he bypassed arenas and stadiums entirely.
He went straight for the Washington Monument in the capital of the United States.
He targeted the National Mall, specifically that massive grassy expanse stretching all the way from the monument down to the Lincoln Memorial.
He actually referred to this specific area as the heart of America.
And that geographical choice is no accident. Prior to this event, only 2 people had ever managed to hold large-scale events on that specific part of the National Mall.
Just 2.
One was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with his defining civil rights rally. The other was the Reverend Billy Graham.
So this space was already loaded with the absolute highest level of historical, political, and spiritual symbolism in the American consciousness.
Exactly. By choosing this location, he was issuing a direct challenge to the most symbolic space in the entire country. He was placing himself, a foreign religious leader whom many Americans still viewed with deep suspicion, on the exact same stage as King and Graham.
And the hurdles to actually pull this off were staggering.
Yeah.
The U.S. government pushed back incredibly hard against granting the permits.
Oh, they fought it.
And this wasn't just typical bureaucratic red tape. Most officials actively disliked him at this time.
Right.
Why? Because during the height of the Watergate scandal, he had taken out full-page newspaper ads urging Americans to forgive President Richard Nixon.
Wait, let's pause there, because in the mid-1970s, right as the Watergate scandal was destroying public trust, asking the American public to forgive Richard Nixon was essentially political suicide.
Yeah, nobody wanted to hear that.
Why would a foreign religious leader take such a massive risk to intervene in American partisan politics?
That is the crucial context here. For him, defending Nixon wasn't about Nixon the man, or even about endorsing his political actions.
What was it about then?
It was entirely about combating global communism. He firmly believed that a strong, stable United States presidency was the only thing holding back the spread of communism worldwide.
Oh, I see.
To him, the Watergate scandal was a dangerous distraction that was weakening America at a critical moment in the Cold War.
So his anti-communist strategy required him to take a stance that made him deeply unpopular with the American public and the press.
Exactly. And because of that lingering unpopularity, the government kept turning down the permit for the Washington Monument rally.
They just stalled.
They delayed and delayed, only finally granting official permission a mere 40 days prior to the event date.
Just 40 days.
To 40 days to organize what was supposed to be the largest gathering in the city's history.
Which is a logistical nightmare even today, let alone in the 1970s before the internet or cell phones.
Even his own senior members were panicking. They were telling him this is too ambitious, we need to cancel or scale back.
Like, you can't blame them.
They pointed out the reality of the National Mall. It is a massive, wide-open park. There are very few trees to hide empty space.
Right, if nobody shows up, everyone sees it.
If a crowd was small, it would be painfully obvious to everyone, especially the media, who were already eager to write him off. They knew they would need literally hundreds of thousands of people just to make the space look full, and they openly doubted it was physically possible with just over a month to mobilize.
The internal pressure from his own organization must have been immense. He writes about a period of intense, unrelenting preparation. He isolated himself, praying without ceasing for the success of the rally.
And he also broke one of his own cardinal rules. He almost never spoke from prepared texts. He usually spoke extemporaneously.
Really? For an event this size?
Well, normally yes, but the stakes were so high for this that he wrote and rewrote his speech 4 different times. Even a week before the event, he still had mixed feelings about the draft.
That shows how much pressure he felt.
He only finally completed the definitive text a mere 3 days before stepping onto the stage, entirely consumed by the need for the messaging to be flawless.
This brings us to the day of the rally, September 18, 1976.
Imagine the scene on the National Mall. People started arriving at the Washington Monument in the early hours of the morning.
And the crowds just kept swelling.
And the final count claimed an astounding 300,000 people gathered there. He observed the crowd and noted that it was impossible to even fathom where all these people had traveled from.
He specifically highlights the demographic makeup of that massive crowd in the book, noting the incredible diversity of hair and skin colors.
Yeah, people from everywhere.
He describes it as a gathering of all the races that God sent to Earth. In his view, it had transcended a national American rally. He categorized it as an event on a truly global scale.
And when he finally stood in front of this sea of humanity, his declarations were uncompromising.
What did he say?
He declared that God had been preparing America for 200 years specifically for this exact moment of global awakening. He insisted that America had to accept its monumental responsibility, arm itself with what he called Godism, free the communist world, and ultimately build the kingdom of God here on Earth.
To give you some context on that term, Godism wasn't just a vague theological buzzword. It was his framework for an absolute God-centered ideology that he believed was the only viable, powerful enough counter-narrative to atheistic communism.
He was offering an ideological weapon.
Exactly. And the crowd was incredibly responsive, interrupting the speech repeatedly with massive shouts and applause.
But something really surprising happened regarding the broader reception of this event. It wasn't just his own dedicated followers who showed up to hear about Godism.
No, it wasn't.
A significant number of ministers from established mainstream American churches actually brought their entire congregations to the rally.
After all the friction and theological clashing we discussed regarding the seminary, that is a profound shift.
It really is. According to his perspective, these mainstream ministers realized that his core message transcended specific denominational boundaries and that he was uniquely capable of inspiring a lost generation of young people.
He views this as the ultimate realization of his call for religious unity.
To him, the fact that 300,000 people attended, making it one of the largest gatherings ever on the National Mall, meant the Washington Monument rally wasn't just a logistical success. He explicitly defines it as a literal miracle.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You would assume an event of that undeniable magnitude, held peacefully in the nation's capital, would bring a certain level of universal respect or acclaim.
You would think so.
And initially, there was mainstream recognition. Newsweek featured his photograph in their high-profile year-end review, categorizing his movement as a major part of the revivalism sweeping the 1970s. But alongside that media acknowledgement, a very intense, deeply rooted pushback was rapidly brewing.
The autobiography is very candid about this fallout. It doesn't shy away from the fact that an increasing number of Americans were beginning to look at him not just with caution, but with outright fear.
People began viewing him, as he describes it, as a strange magician who had come from the East.
That phrasing says a lot.
It does, and this points directly to a profound underlying cultural insecurity in America at the time. He highlights the intense discomfort that many Americans felt seeing young, predominantly white people showing deep respect and deference to an Asian man.
Right.
He specifically notes the racial prejudice directed at his physical appearance, mentioning how people mocked his slender eyes, describing them as shaped like a fish. And it was largely because of this underlying racial prejudice and cultural unfamiliarity that rumors began spreading like wildfire, that he wasn't inspiring these young white people, but rather brainwashing them.
This is a crucial pivot in his analysis of the American landscape. He argues that the fierce opposition he faced wasn't actually rooted in theological disagreements. It was about America's own internal, unaddressed demons.
The chronic illnesses he mentioned.
Yes. He asserts that while America promotes itself globally as the ultimate country of freedom and equality, it is actually suffering from chronic illnesses embedded deep within its historical DNA, namely racial and religious discrimination.
It's a heavy critique.
It is, and he makes a very sharp, uncompromising observation here. He argues that these deeply embedded prejudices are vastly more difficult to cure than the superficial social diseases of the 1970s, like materialism or a lack of morals.
He really forces the reader to confront this reality. To foster ecumenical harmony and understand the true depth of these issues, he frequently visited African-American churches.
Right.
And he shares some incredibly striking, visceral details about what he witnessed in the basements of some of these churches. The ministers there maintained historical archives on their walls.
Very powerful images.
He describes looking at pictures of slave markets that operated for hundreds of years. He saw an image of a black man being burned alive while hanging from a tree, Another photograph showed black men and women entirely stripped of their clothes, being meticulously inspected like livestock by slave buyers.
It's hard to even hear.
It is, and perhaps most harrowing, an image of a black baby screaming as it was forcibly taken from its mother.
It is horrific, undeniable imagery. He notes that looking at these photographs, one could hardly believe human beings were capable of such barbaric, systematic acts.
Yeah.
By prominently including these descriptions in his autobiography, he anchors his critique of America in the harsh reality of its historical racial violence. He is deliberately aligning his own movement's modern struggle for acceptance with the much broader, deeply painful historical struggle against systemic racism in the United States.
Specifically invoking the legacy of leaders like Dr. King, who fought for a world defined by peace rather than prejudice. And this intense focus on race culminates in a stunning moment in the narrative. He recalls a gathering in Chicago on October 24, 1975. He stood in front of a crowd and delivered a very specific prophecy.
This part is fascinating.
He told them, wait and see. Within the next 30 years, there will be a president of the United States who was born into an interracial black and white family.
And he explicitly connects this 1975 prophecy to modern political history.
Right. He points directly to the inauguration of President Barack Obama, noting the powerful coincidence that Obama spent much of his formative adult life and political career in Chicago, the very city where the prophecy was delivered.
It's quite a connection.
But the way he frames this is what's truly fascinating. In his worldview, this wasn't just a lucky guess or a passive prediction. He frames the fulfillment of this prophecy as the direct result of the blood, sweat, and tears shed by countless civil rights activists who fought to dismantle the struggles between the races.
He viewed the election as the ultimate blossoming of those agonizing historical efforts.
Exactly.
This raises an important question as we look at the entire arc of the narrative presented today. We are looking at a deeply ambitious, highly organized movement led by an absolute outsider who sought to completely unify fractured global beliefs.
Yeah.
This movement successfully executed a 300,000-person rally on the most symbolic ground in America against seemingly impossible logistical and political odds, and it deliberately, aggressively confronted the severe cultural and racial tensions of the 1970s.
It covers so much ground.
We've moved from intense theological debates in a New York seminary to lecturing the U.S. Congress on self-sacrifice, to fundamentally challenging the racial anxieties of the American public, all culminating in a claim of prophetic foresight regarding the highest office in the land.
It is a massive, sweeping historical narrative. So what does this all mean for you?
That is the big question.
When you step back and look at these accounts, it really forces you to think about how massive culturally disruptive movements actually take root and grow in the real world. They almost always center around a single, highly polarizing figure. And it makes you wonder about the sheer audacity required for an outsider to step into a foreign country and force that society to look directly at its own deep-rooted, chronic issues, the ones it desperately wants to ignore.
It absolutely challenges us to consider the friction between established cultural norms and disruptive new ideologies. History is rarely quiet or comfortable.
Definitely not.
It is shaped by clashes of worldview, by moments of intense public spectacle, and by the deep-seated fears and aspirations of the public reacting to something they don't fully understand.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over today. If a single event can gather 300,000 people in the heart of the nation's capital, challenging the very cultural fabric of a country during a time of immense political division and insecurity, how do we even begin to measure the lasting, unseen impact of such movements on our current political and religious landscape?
It's a great question.
How much of the history we are living in right now was shaped simply because someone, somewhere, decided to step into the ring and throw a completely unexpected uppercut?
It is definitely something worth exploring further as we look at the leaders and movements shaping our own era.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a new perspective and some truly fascinating history to think about. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and take care.